What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Tuesday, May 16th, 2017, and boy, do we have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room ready to answer the phone and put you on the air. And the big breaking story right now, and no, you will not see this. Well, actually, this did come out of the corporate media. Believe it or not, a Fox News affiliate in Washington, D.C. has run this story. It's not gone national yet. They're still going on about North Korea and Donald Trump the traitor and all the rest of that stuff. But apparently a detective hired by Seth Rich's family has confirmed Seth Rich was in communication with WikiLeaks. And so those DNC emails that Hillary and all of her people were blaming on those evil Russian hackers, it was a leak. Internally, it was a leak. It wasn't the Russian hackers. Apparently, Seth Rich shared a total of 44,053 Democratic emails with WikiLeaks. This is now confirmed. And it puts the lie to that whole story about Russian hackers. And apparently Fox actually picked up on this, and now that the detective has come on out, more people are coming on out and saying, yes, we were aware Seth Rich was sharing information with WikiLeaks. And so, yeah, we were right all along to suspect that he was the leak. I mean, Julian Assange actually named him and implied it was him. But we're seeing all these stories from places like, well, again, I have to give them credit where credit is due. Fox News is reporting this. And apparently Seth Rich, according to the information found on the computer by this detective who's like a former homicide detective in D.C., and he was working for one of the state governments, and I got his CV here a little bit later on here. But apparently Seth Rich made contact with WikiLeaks through Gavin McFadden, who unfortunately he passed away. Nothing suspicious in his death. It was lung cancer. American investigative reporter, documentary filmmaker, and a director of WikiLeaks. So that was the contact. That was how the information got there. So that's the important talking point. The DNC emails were leaked, not hacked. Russia had nothing to do with it. Even Julian Assange said the source was not Russia. So that whole story about Russian hacking the election and hacking the DNC is just absolutely collapsing. And I noticed that the people who are trying to take down my server, they're DOSing specifically the Clinton body count file. They don't want anybody downloading that and looking at that, which doesn't really matter because we made a PDF of it and put it out on social media weeks ago. So it's already out there. And anyway, let's see. The private investigator, they're not naming him, but he's a former homicide detective in Washington, D.C., white-collar criminal investigator for the Attorney General of the state of Ohio. And saying, yes, an examination of Seth Rich's computer confirmed he was sending this information over to WikiLeaks. Now, WikiLeaks itself has released an email from John Podesta saying that he was going to make an example of anybody who was caught leaking. So it's all falling into place. Now remember, the official story is Seth Rich was killed in a botched robbery just steps from his home, except the robbers didn't take anything. When Seth Rich's body was found, he still had his wallet, his watch, and his cell phone. Those are all valuable items to criminals. It was a hit. Absolutely. Now, the official family spokesperson for Seth Rich's family is now out there saying, no, there's absolutely no evidence that Seth Rich was leaking to WikiLeaks. I don't know where this is all coming. It's complete nonsense. And you need to understand, this family spokesperson was imposed on Seth Rich's family. And he's a professional Democratic crisis public relations consultant with the Pastorum Group. He's a professional fixer-upper, cover-upper. That's what's going on. Now, when it was talking about WannaCry, and I made a reference to an article I wrote a while back called The Virtual 911. will the U.S. launch a massive cyber attack on somebody and blame it on their enemy? And sure enough, we're now seeing all these stories that the WannaCry ransomware is from North Korea. We can't actually prove it, but there are telling indications. And remember, North Korea is really not that hip on computers. They have very little internet up there. They're not exactly a hotbed for cybercrime. Even antiwar.com is out there saying there's no actual proof to it. And again, it's being touted. The NSA code notwithstanding, they say they're finding code similar to what was used by the Lazarus Group, which is believed to be North Korean, that was used to hack into Sony Motion Pictures. Except that at Sony Motion Pictures, like the DNC, it ultimately turned out it was not a hack, it was an internal leak. But the reality is the vast majority of WannaCry is a copy of exploits developed by the National Security Agency. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. We were talking about it's now confirmed. Seth Rich was leaking DNC emails to WikiLeaks. It wasn't a Russian hack. And now we're talking about this attempt to try and blame North Korea for the WannaCry. And again, this is the way politicians think. They're not concerned with the truth or reality or facts. It's how can they use what is going on to further their particular agenda. Oh, we've got to make America hate North Korea. Well, we'll use the WannaCry. We'll blame it on them. And after that, we'll blame it on Iran. And after that, we'll blame it on whoever. It's like weapons of mass destruction or hacking. Just blame everybody and try and get the wars going that way. Now, the other thing that's going on here is this attempt once again to cast Donald Trump as an agent of Russia. And yesterday the Washington Compost came out with a story claiming that Donald Trump revealed highly classified information to Russian officials during an official meeting with them. And they're trying to make a big deal about, oh, Donald Trump, this is a high crime, it's at least a misdemeanor, this is impeachable for him to do that. And McMasters has already come on out and said basically all that Trump told them was the concerns about laptops in aircraft cabins. Now, that is not a secret. It was all over the news just last week. And no methods or sources were divulged. And just as a fine point of it, the president does have the authority to declassify anything he feels is necessary. So this is just another attempt to put the focus back on Donald Trump and the links to Russia by Hillary's people, who are obviously scared out of their minds that with Comey gone and all these lawsuits from places like Judicial Watch and Freedom Watch and possibly the Department of Justice closing in, that they may be in serious, serious trouble, that the good times might be over. And here's what's really interesting. The corporate media, the Washington Compost, the New York Slimes that are out there trying to say Donald Trump released this highly classified information, describe the highly classified information in their articles. It's just ridiculous. And again, this so-called secret was all over the corporate media just last week. We're going to go ahead and take a phone call. David from San Francisco, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hi, Michael. Hey, in yours, as I'm listening to this, it reminds me of a 9/11 conspiracy idea that you may be familiar with. Have you watched any of the videos about what's called the Black Eagle Trust?
No, I hadn't. Please enlighten us.
Well, this was the idea that, in 9/11, the two buildings that were hit, the very windows that were hit, were brokerage houses. And that apparently 10 years before 9/11, almost 10 years to the day before 9/11, there was a secret bond issue that the CIA had basically decided that the Soviet Union was a goner, and they were going to get together as much money as they could get and buy up the former Soviet Union. And so they created a fake bond issue, and it was dated, I think, September 12th of 1991. And so it was a 10-year bond issue that would run out on September 12th of 2001. So the very windows that were hit were the brokerage houses that handled this bond issue, and then because it was a kind of a CIA secret operation, the very section of the Pentagon that handled the accounting was caught up in this bond issue. Well, basically, if this was true, that they had come up with $250 billion to buy up the Soviet Union. They bought all the apartment houses and the factories and the mining and the grain silos and everything that they could buy. So basically, the Russian economy to this day must still be in the hands of these people that came up with the fake bond issue. Because 9/11 in this scenario was to hide the evidence that this $250 billion was stolen from America, used to buy up Russia, and that those guys are keeping it, and they never did let us know about what they did with our money.
Well,
So,
it's an interesting theory, and I have actually heard it before. I didn't know it by that particular name. And again, we need to go back to this idea that no great event, no assassination, no war ever happens for just one reason. Once the decision is made to say we're going to do something, everybody says, well, if we do it this way, it's going to help me. And I think the classic example of that would be the Oklahoma City bombing, which was done to advance this domestic anti-terror agenda, but at the same time it was used to get rid of all the paperwork from the assault on that church in Waco, Texas, just ahead of the congressional investigation. So there may have been something along that line going there. We know that one of the major credit card companies that was headquartered in the World Trade Towers, there was a transfer of a huge sum of money out of their computers just before the planes hit. And, of course, because the computers were destroyed, nobody could tell where that money went. There was a company that was trying to recover the data off the computer drives with a new technology, but they got mysteriously bought up and the project put on the shelf there. Apparently there was a gold vault in the basement of the World Trade Center when they finally got down there following the demolition. That had been emptied, so there was a lot of skullduggery going on over there.
Actually, the gold didn't entirely get emptied. There was a truck that got pinned in there. There was a tunnel to the street, and the roof of that tunnel caved in just about a foot or something and wedged a truck down in there. So they're not sure if any other trucks got out before that one, but they weren't entirely emptied. But yeah, that Frederick Whitehurst came up with that gold theory. But this bond issue, I've seen it on YouTube. If you just kind of do a Google search of Black Eagle Trust plus 9/11, you'll be able to find a couple of different versions of the same theory, and they do back up some of what you were just talking about. But this whole idea of who really owns Russia, though.
Well, I got to tell you, my first reaction is the volume of money that you're talking about. First of all, pales in significance to all the money that the Pentagon has mislaid over the years. I don't think you could buy all that much of Russia for it, to be very, very honest. It simply isn't enough money to make a significant inroad to Russia. Yes, it would buy a lot of assets, but not to the point where Russia is somehow being controlled by this. Anyway, listen, David, interesting theory. I am going to let you go because I do want to get back.
The oligarchs.
I want to get to current events. So thank you very much for the phone call, and we're going to let you go there. Now then, getting on back to the present day. The Kremlin has already issued a statement saying that this claim that Trump disclosed classified information to their diplomats is nonsense. In fact, their reaction is pretty much ridicule, and they're saying that this is obviously another attempt to damage Donald Trump and to protect Hillary Clinton, and that's exactly what it is. Now, when this first report came out in the Washington Compost, they were claiming that the reason for the ire was that one of the U.S. allies had provided this information about exploding laptops to the U.S., and they were very concerned that their sources and methods might be compromised. Well, the New York Times has now come on out and said that, yes, that was Israel. And again, there are reasons to doubt this whole thing about exploding laptops because there isn't a lot of room inside laptops. And how powerful an explosion is just as much how much explosive there is and what its shape is. If it's not in a compact shaped like a sphere or a tube. It'll burn really rapidly, but you won't get a high-powered detonation. So the story is a little flaky to begin with. But again, McMaster's came on out and said that all Trump told them was there was a concern about the possibility of laptops being used to sabotage aircraft, and they were considering a ban on laptops in aircraft cabins. And again, that part is not secret. It was all over the news last week. This is just the deep state trying to keep the focus on Donald Trump. Remember that rumor, still no confirmation, the rumor that's being spread around, there's a sealed indictment against Donald Trump for his connections with Russia. So they're still piling on there because over in Hillary land, they got to be getting really, really nervous, especially with the revelation that, yes, Seth Rich was the DNC leak. It wasn't Russian hackers. And now more people are starting to talk here. Now, all this talk about Donald Trump having the authority to declassify information, he does. He's the president. He can do it. The question is, what was his motive? Did he feel it was necessary to share information for safety of airlines? Seems to be it. Contrast that with President Bill Clinton, who used his authority to declassify technology to transfer to China. And his motive was that Chinese money was pouring into his re-election campaign. That was the Chinagate scandal back in 1994. Should have been investigated, but oh, golly gee shuckies, the email server at the White House broke down, and we just forgot to make backups for the last couple of months. So nothing there, nothing to investigate. It just kind of went away. Nobody made a big stink about it back then, certainly not on the Democratic side. All right, we're going to take another phone call. Steve in Massachusetts, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I want to talk to you about the cyber attack.
Yes.
And I heard an interview. It was around 3 weeks ago. This guy was talking about a cybersecurity company called Hack ETF.
Mm-hmm.
And what he said was, look for the shares to go over $30, and when that's going to happen, there's going to be a cyber attack. So I've been waiting. I've checked every day for like 3 weeks. It was up and down, but it was always below 30. Then, as soon as it hit 30, sure enough, it was a cyber attack. And I was like, wow, that's kind of weird. He was right. I don't know why he said the $30 mark, which is kind of weird, but I looked up today, and it said on the web that Hack ETF, which is a cybersecurity company, had its biggest rise in shares, biggest profits in 1 year.
Well,
so I wonder if
I mean,
do you think this is all staged, or?
Well, I think it may be staged. They're already trying to blame North Korea for it. And remember, on 9/11, when that happened, there were some funny things going on with the stock market, with shorts on the airlines that were involved, and there was no reason to be shorting them prior to 9/11. So somebody had inside knowledge. When you're going to stage some kind of an event like that, you look for ways to make money off of it. Anybody who knew that this cyber attack was going to be coming would probably be going long on stocks for all the cybersecurity companies because obviously their business just took a huge leap upward.
Yeah, exactly. So I just found that all kind of fishy, and I don't know how this guy knew the information, but yeah.
Do you remember the movie The Net with Sandra Bullock? And there was this real big computer security company, and they were doing huge amounts of business, and it turned out they were creating the cyber threats to scare people to buy their products. It would sort of make it a modern version of the old mafia protection racket. If you don't buy security from us, something bad going to happen to your computer. And we certainly cannot rule out that maybe WannaCry was put on out there to stimulate sales for the computer security companies. It's not beyond the realm of possibility. In a nation where corporate crime is just absolutely ignored. Anyway, Steve, we got to let you go. Take a break for commercials. We'll be right back after these few words from our sponsor. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And Hillary Clinton is still out there making waves, making trouble. And she has officially launched a new organization called Onward Together, with the stated goal of advancing the vision that earned nearly 66 million votes in the last election. Ignoring the fact that quite a few of those votes were actually manufactured out of thin air or cast by illegal immigrants and so forth and so on. So basically, again, the deep state continues to organize to try and get rid of Donald Trump or get him under control. And more, we're starting to see Donald Trump stand up and become more of his own man. We're still hearing word that there's going to be a major staff shakeup at the White House. He's going to get rid of some of these career advisors and politicians, bring in some outsiders, and I'm available. So it's going to be interesting to see what evolves over the coming weeks here, because all of a sudden it feels like Donald Trump has grown a backbone. Article coming out of ntknetwork.com talking about how Democrats are all excited about how they're going to take back the House of Representatives in next year's elections, but actually looking at the numbers and saying it's not going to be as easy as they're putting on out. Although maybe they're thinking they're just going to steal it rather than try and actually get voted in. Now, here's where things are going to get very interesting, and this is another reason why the Hillaryites are in a sweat. Following former FBI Director James Comey's firing, Susan Rice has directed her lawyers to contact the FBI about acquiring an immunity deal. Apparently, she's ready to talk. I'm sure somebody's going to ask how it is that she is worth $50 million on a career civil service salary, but that's a side point. Starting to see people break ranks here. So, Susan, stay out of small aircraft, stay out of small suburban Washington, D.C. parks. Now, Washington reporter Jack Posobiec, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, is out there claiming that James Comey deliberately dropped the Susan Rice investigation because he himself would have been incriminated by it. Washington, D.C. is this giant Gordian knot of corruption. Everything is tied to everything else. And I hope Donald Trump remembers just how it was that Alexander the Great solved the Gordian knot, because I think it's time for that approach. Now, more evidence is surfacing that, yes, the Obama administration was conducting political spying, not just against the Trump administration, but members of Congress. And the data is on 47 hard drives from a government whistleblower. He's going through the proper whistleblowing legal process. He doesn't want to be another Edward Snowden. And this information has now been turned over to the Freedom Watch group. And the information proves that Obama and his associates spied on everybody. And it's coming by way of whistleblower Dennis Montgomery. Now, interestingly enough, shortly before he died under very suspicious circumstances, Justice Scalia was convinced the Supreme Court was being spied on by Obama. So, we're in Nixon-Watergate territory here. Now, all this talk about involvement with foreign governments and all the rest of it, if you think about it very carefully, former CIA Director Brennan did work with foreign spies to keep Trump out of the Oval Office in order to have deniability. U.S. intelligence agencies, including the CIA, went through Britain's GCHQ to carry out the actual surveillance. We're not spying on Donald Trump. I don't know how we got all this information on him, but it wasn't us. And, of course, that was the whole idea behind Five Eyes in the first place. Five-nation alliance, each of them spies on each other's citizens and trades the information so that they can claim they are in compliance with their nation's privacy laws. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And let's see, we're talking about ex-CIA Director Brennan was working with Britain's GCHQ to carry out political spying on Donald Trump, his associates, his potential appointees. And again, according to Rand Paul, members of the Congress were being surveilled. Justice Scalia, shortly before his strange death, shared with Judge Napolitano that he thought the Supreme Court was being spied on. And if that's true and the other justices on the Supreme Court are aware of it, that might lead them to be a little bit more supportive of that Fourth Amendment. Meanwhile, members of Congress have sent a letter to the Attorney General Jeff Sessions saying it is time to reopen the case against Lois Lerner and get back to this idea of the IRS being used as a political weapon against conservative groups and other political enemies of the Obama administration. Because that is a serious, serious situation. One of the original articles of impeachment against Richard Nixon was that he used the IRS as a political weapon. And eventually he had to resign over the obstruction charge. But yes, it's time to reopen the case. There is a dearth of evidence. Conveniently, Lois Lerner's hard drive failed, and conveniently, they weren't making backups. But isn't that data somewhere on those NSA data centers? Or are these large buildings just a hoax, just a big empty warehouse? Now, Ron Paul is stepping up his concerns about the rush to a new world war. And he's basically saying to Trump, you should toss your general's war escalation plans in the trash because you have Defense Secretary Mattis and National Security Advisor McMaster are devising a plan calling for military escalations in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria, just ramping up the wars in all of these places. We've been in Afghanistan longer than we were in either of the two world wars. And we have gone into Iraq, 3 times now, and still can't settle that down. Now, getting on to the fine details here. The last 1,000 rebels are now leaving Damascus, Syria, under this evacuation deal. Basically, Assad has come on out and said, surrender your weapons, promise you will behave, and you can go home. And they're taking him up on that. So Damascus is now pretty much back under the control of the Syrian government. Meanwhile, story coming out of Activist Post, a chemical weapons expert is out there saying that this so-called new evidence from Idlib proves absolutely nothing. And Americans are right to question the official story given how many other lies and frauds we have been fed to goad us into wars that we really have no business being in. Because all the so-called new evidence is just a rehash of the same old lies over and over and over again. Now, former CIA official Robert Steele is out there saying that, yes, it was a false flag, and the false flag was funded by the Saudis and the Israelis. And here is where it gets interesting, because 2 of the terrorists involved in that chemical weapons attack have now confessed it was done by the rebels to frame Bashar al-Assad. And that's Walid Hendi, who confessed to taking part in fabricating videos and photos for a Turkish TV channel while working with the so-called white helmets that depicted neighborhoods or purported to depict neighborhoods and areas in Aleppo being attacked with chemical weapons in order to blame Syria. Now remember that following Idlib there was that slow camera pan across the supposedly dead children, and then the camera backs up and one of the kids has opened their eyes to see if it's okay to move again. And then there was another one, Imad Abdel Jawad, said terrorists in Aleppo possessed the toxic chemicals and he took part in transporting them. So that big lie is falling apart. All right, we're going to take another phone call. Ken in Massachusetts, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. Called you once before, probably a year or so ago, but I sent you a steady stream of stuff by email that I think you might find interesting.
Thank you.
The latest thing I sent you about was this fellow Brad Bauman. All the communications from the Rich family apparently are going through this guy.
Yes.
And I'm looking at his LinkedIn profile. He's currently executive director of, he's a partner in the Past Storm Group, and they it says managing a crisis communication and full-service public relations firm. He's been with various Democratic Party outfits over the years, executive director of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and even going back a ways back, 2007 to 2009, worked as with Office of Congressman Tim Ryan, has worked with media outlets to craft positive stories about the congressman's legislative agenda.
Yes.
So in other words, all this stuff from the Rich family today is going through this guy who's basically a damage control specialist. So I wonder what the actual situation of the Rich family is right now.
Well, here's the situation. When following Seth Rich's murder, somehow or other, the Hillary campaign got Rich's family to agree to be quiet and let this guy speak on their behalf. But apparently Seth Rich's family were very unhappy with the official story, and so they basically went outside and they hired this private detective who used to be a homicide detective in Washington, D.C., and white-collar crimes investigation for the Attorney General of Ohio. And he basically investigated, and he's the one who's gone public saying that, yes, there is absolutely no question. Seth Rich was leaking emails from the DNC to WikiLeaks, more than 44,000 of them. And so now, of course, Brad is out there trying to do damage control, saying that there's absolutely no evidence, and nobody's going to listen to him anymore because he's, as you say, he's a spin doctor. He's out there.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, he's a spin doctor, and that's his job. That's what public relations is, lying to the public for profit.
The way it's being portrayed in the press, though, is that the family is upset with this PI, calling it, and that the family is calling this fake news. And they're citing this Bauman character and calling him the Rich family's spokesman.
Mm-hmm.
So it's being framed in the media that the family is upset that and saying that this PI agreed not to talk to anyone outside law enforcement, etc. So very strange here. Very strange here. This is what if you look at any mainstream media, they're saying the Rich family is calling this PI's information fake news, but it's all being supposedly channeled through Bauman as the Rich family spokesman.
Yeah, well, basically the corporate media is going to go to Bauman to get the official story. They're not going to interview the Rich family directly. I'd be more convinced if the Rich family came on out. And even then you'd have to wonder because when you've had a family member clearly assassinated for political gain, it tends to make you a little skittish. And,
absolutely.
Following the murder of Vincent Foster, his widow stayed silent, wouldn't talk to the press. Foster's own sister came on out and said, oh, yes, it was definitely a suicide. Don't listen to the kooks. So I can imagine a huge amount of pressure is being brought to bear on these family members through the very simple thing of you can wind up the same way. We'll kill you and say that you were depressed over the loss of your relative and you just killed yourself as well. And, plus, money, financial inducement.
Yeah, I just wanted to get that out there. There's this stuff going around saying, oh, the Rich family is writing this guy off as full of it. And you really got to kind of dig to find out that no one's really getting anything directly from the family.
That's exactly the point.
So.
No, the family has been walled off. And I don't know if they were bribed initially or they were threatened initially to let this guy be their spokesman. But there have been many, many indications in the past that he is not, in fact, reflective of what the Seth Rich family themselves are actually thinking and feeling. I mean, obviously, they hired this detective. So they had questions about what was going on. If the Seth Rich family accepted the official story, they wouldn't have hired the PI to check it out.
Well, here's the thing, though. Apparently, and I don't know who it is, but supposedly this PI was hired by a third party, being paid by a third party, and I don't know who that is.
I hadn't heard that one either. I thought he was working directly for the Seth Rich family. I remember there was one family member who wasn't going along with this staying silent deal who came on out and said that he was going to get a private investigator. But here's the bottom line. We need to see the data from the laptop. And if it's real, then that's basically it. And we need to get away from this he said, she said situation. But supposedly the FBI does have all these emails from Seth Rich's laptops. And so they know the reality of what's going on. Okay? All right. Well, thanks a lot.
Great to talk to you.
All right, thanks a lot. We're going to let you go. Bye-bye. All right, here we go. Okay, over in Iraq, their security forces are continuing to put pressure on the ISIL, whatever they're calling themselves these days, to get around the ban on CIA support. And they're in the western district of Mosul, and they're being pushed right up to the border with Syria. So they're making gains there as well. I mean, if you look at all these battles all over the earth, it's very clear we're in a world war. They're just not willing to say this is where we are. We haven't had the big bang like a Lusitania or a Pearl Harbor, where everybody says, yep, it's a world war. Let's get on with it here. Meanwhile, it's interesting. Trump is having his first meeting with Turkey's Sultan, Erdogan, trying to reset their relations. But apparently Turkey's war on the Kurds continues to cross borders into Syria and Iraq. And neither Syria nor Iraq are very happy about this. Of course, behind it all, there is that agenda of eventually carving off large chunks of these other nations to form an independent Kurdistan as part of the planned Balkanization of the Middle East, to turn the Middle East into little tiny countries that are easy to bully and push around. Interesting story coming on out of the original antiwar.com. Somebody actually did a poll, and Americans are seeing South Korea and Israel as the two U.S. allies most likely to embroil the U.S. in an unnecessary, protracted, and costly war. 36% of Americans believe South Korea is most likely, while 28.5% of Americans believe Israel is most likely. Now, at this point, I'm going to suggest that this poll may have been taken before the election of South Korea's new president, who is favoring de-escalation of tensions with the North. He's a supporter of the Sunshine Policy, eventual reunification. And that is literally going to pull the rug out of the U.S. agenda in North Korea unless they stage some kind of a false flag. Meanwhile, Israel is in a huge huff because apparently a U.S. diplomat made a comment on how the Western Wall on the Temple Mount is part of the Israeli-occupied West Bank. Now, Israel considers all of Jerusalem to be theirs, a claim that is not recognized internationally. And the Western Wall is part of the territory Israel captured in the 1967 Middle East War. But the reality is, under international law, the UN, the Temple Mount is in Israeli-occupied West Bank territory. It's not part of the official border of Israel if they ever get around to drawing one. But it looks like Israel is getting ready to escalate the situation and have the final solution to the Palestinian problem. A very alarming article that's coming out of Global Research up in Canada, where apparently Netanyahu is basically starting a movement to legalize Israeli occupation and annexation of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights. They want out that oil and gas. And it's basically a land grab. And once it is over, the Netanyahu government apparently intends to carry out a unilateral expulsion of the 5 million indigenous Palestinians in a forced transfer from their ancestral lands to new refugee camps in adjoining states of Lebanon, Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. Now, as of this point, Lebanon, Egypt, Jordan, and Syria are not willing to take in any more Palestinian refugees. They already have more than they know what to do with. They want them to go home. This may be the start of the so-called Greater Israel Project, which is an illegitimate expansionist program running from the River Nile to the Euphrates in order to fulfill the biblical image of Greater Israel, as described in the Bible. That's it. All this suffering and death is all about something that was written in the Bible. Things are getting tense up on the Russian border. Article out of the Express. World on a knife edge. Russia furious as NATO creates permanent soldier town near their border. This is over in apparently Latvia. They're building a permanent base for 500 soldiers, and some 1,300 soldiers are now stationed in Orsic, northeastern Poland. And it's obviously to counter Russian aggression. No, it isn't. You don't see Russia building military bases on the Canadian side of our northern border or the Mexican side of our southern border, do you? You don't see Russian warships tooling around the Gulf of Mexico, sailing up and down off the coast of California. They're not the aggressors here. And they never were. We need to keep that in mind. This is all part of that project for the new American century. From back in the 1990s, the U.S. is the sole remaining superpower. Let's act like it and go on out and make the world our oyster. We'll bring our civilization to these other countries. Looking at how things are going in this country, I don't think we're really a good model for other countries to be following when you look at all the problems we have. All right, we've got to take another break for commercials. And we will be back after these few words. Join us on the air, 800-313-9443. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. I want to back on up to the Trump White House because there's a story that just came out on Raw Story. And the headline is, Trump becoming sour and dark as he turns against son-in-law Jared Kushner. Again, it's an attempt to make Trump look bad. But the key point here is that apparently Donald Trump is not listening to Jared Kushner anymore. And that's actually a good thing because Kushner is definitely the pro-Israel force. Whatever Israel wants, we will give it to them. We have to do this, we have to do that. And maybe Trump has just decided that's gone on far enough as well. Maybe Kushner is going to be caught in this White House shakeup. I think would be a wonderful thing to have happen. Alrighty, getting on back to the war zones. Azerbaijan hits Armenian missile system in Nagorno-Karabakh. And apparently Azerbaijan's defense ministry says it's destroyed this air defense missile system, which obviously wasn't very good, at Nagorno-Karabakh. Now, Nagorno-Karabakh is officially part of Azerbaijan, but since a separatist war ended in 1994, it's been under the control of forces that claim to be local ethnic Armenians, but that Azerbaijan claims includes regular Armenian military. So apparently Armenia wanted to carve off a little slice of the country for themselves, and that has led to a standoff. Over on the Ivory Coast, interesting little story. This is out of Press TV. Randy Short, who's a political commentator, is looking at the current army mutiny in the Ivory Coast and says it's a blowback from when the United States and France toppled the sovereign government of Laurent Gbagbo's government. I can't even begin to pronounce it. I apologize that. But basically, it looks like they had another regime change. They kicked out the former government. They imposed a new president, Alassane Ouattara, as the new puppet ruler, and apparently the military has just revolted against that. So it's another regime change, and they botched it up. And there's something you need to keep in mind. When you look at all the regime changes carried out by the U.S. government since the end of World War II, they only succeed half the time. And the problem is, whether they succeed or fail, the targeted country is always left in a ruin. So, let's talk about the economy. It's an article out of the Daily Coin. Is China intentionally making it harder to manipulate gold? I think it would be a good thing if they did, because of all the game playing going on. And apparently, Hong Kong Futures Exchange is introducing a new gold futures contracts. that mandate settlement for the physical metal. The contract is based on a 1 kilo gold bar. And you contract for it, and when the contract is over, you get the bar. Now, under the COMEX gold futures contract, it actually allows the seller of the contract to settle for the cash equivalent. Even if the purchaser of the contract wants the physical metal, the seller of the contract can say, no, we're just going to give you the cash. This is going to shake the gold markets up. We'll be right back. And aloha America, welcome back to our show here. Hour number 2, the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And we're talking about the economic news. We're talking about how Hong Kong's futures market now has a gold contract that must be settled in the physical metal. And that is a really good thing. Under the COMEX rules, if you buy a gold futures contract at COMEX, the seller of the contract has the option of paying off the contract in the cash equivalent. And you can't say anything about it. Even if you want the physical metal, they're going to say, no, we're going to exercise our right under the rules we just made up to just give you stacks of ink and paper instead of the gold that you actually contracted for. And that's how they manipulate the price of metals, because they overprint those contracts to drive the price down. It's one of the ways that they keep metals prices down, to keep people from emptying their negative interest savings accounts, closing out their stock portfolios, and getting into metals. And it's not confined to gold. Over at Investment Watch blog, they have an article saying that you need to take a look at the huge amount of leverage going on in the silver market, where we're talking about literally hundreds to one. For every single ounce of the deliverable metal, there are contracts for 100 ounces, and they're being settled for cash, and they're almost turning it into a make-believe gold. The reason for that is over at the London Daily Fix. They will take the price of the contracts, and they'll mix it with the price of the physical metal to keep the overall price down. It's a scam. And Hong Kong is very right to come on out and say, we're going to have gold futures contracts that deliver in the gold. And I'll tell you what's going to happen right now. People are going to stop buying the contracts where they don't know they're actually going to get the gold, and they're going to flood to Hong Kong to get these things. That is going to really, really shake things up. Now, the IMF is starting to make demands of Germany, saying that Germany must act to reduce their trade surplus. Now, Germany is a manufacturing country. They got a lot of things that they are selling to the European neighbors, and apparently it's causing some upset where they think there should be an even amount of trade across the borders. And so IMF is saying Germany now has to pull back. And that is a two-edged sword, because Germany's prosperity is what is holding up much of the European Union, along with Great Britain, who is heading for the exit door. So the more they play with it, the worse it gets. Ukraine is teetering on the brink of default. Kiev has, over the next 4 years, has to repay $20 billion of debt, much of it incurred for these wars against the eastern Ukrainian republics. The wars have actually devastated much of Ukraine's ability to create products or grow agricultural produce with which to try and earn that money. And they're having trouble getting new loans. And the situation is complicated because they're looking at elections in 2019, and Poroshenko does not want to do anything that is going to be unpopular with the Ukrainian voters. So they're really stuck between a rock and a hard place over there. Meanwhile, here in the United States of America, Ford is getting ready to lay off 20,000 workers. Apparently their profits have dropped 35% so far this year. 1/3. And if you're watching TV, you see the commercials for cars and trucks. The prices are amazing. If you actually had money right now, it would be a great time to be buying a car. But they can't sell them because consumers don't have any money left. Wages and salaries are being driven down. Cost of living is going up. And the consumer economy is falling apart. And prior to the collapse of the mortgage-backed security fraud in 2008, consumer spending accounted for almost 2/3 of the entire U.S. economy. That's a major, major hit. Now, up in Seattle, they're getting ready to clear out this huge homeless camp near South Dearborn and Rainier Avenue. And some are saying it's an extension of the jungle or the hills. They've given it a name. But apparently tomorrow, city officials will begin clearing the camp, starting with a triangle of green space between the Interstate 90 ramps to Rainier, and then moving forward. Where are these people going to go? And I understand they're on the mainland, and the refugees from the homeless camps can walk someplace else. Here in Hawaii, it's very different. We have a lot of homeless people, and they're constantly shoving them from one part of the island to the other so the tourists won't see them. But it's not like they could walk back to the mainland. Hawaii at one point had a program going where if you were homeless and you could confirm there was somebody on the mainland who was willing to take you in, they would buy you the plane ticket to get there, which I think was a good idea. The problem isn't homelessness. The problem is an economy that doesn't allow people to have homes. And we're seeing another froth up in real estate prices and rentals just like that preceded 2008. The Wall Street money junkies, they love their bubbles. They blow them, they ride them up, they get off just before it bursts, and everybody else takes the losses. And they're going to keep on doing it because there's no reason for them to stop. They never go to jail. They never suffer personal financial loss. Yeah, the corporations they work for may go bankrupt, like AIG did in 2008. And then the losses are transferred onto the American people with TARP and QE and bailout and all the rest of it. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. The debate over Obamacare versus Trump care continues to rage along. There's a lot of money on the line for the health insurance industry. Not as much as they hoped. In fact, a lot of these health insurance industries, if Obamacare goes away, they're in serious, serious trouble because they overcommitted. And we're seeing all these exchanges are shutting down, and apparently there's just a mess trying to sort out all the paperwork of things being processed. Nobody knows where any of it is. So Nancy Pelosi gets up at the Center for American Progress conference in Washington and says that Obamacare honors the commitment of the Founding Fathers to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is a bit of a reach. That's a bit of a reach. For one thing, we didn't have the liberty to choose our own health care. Remember when Obama said, if you like your health care plan, you can keep your health care plan? No, you can't. Doesn't sound like much liberty to me. And I would like to respond to Nancy Pelosi with a quote from one of those founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson. If the people let government decide what foods they eat and what medicines they take, their bodies will soon be in as sorry a state as are the souls of those who live under tyranny. So that's what the founding fathers think about Obamacare and a lot of what else that's going on right now. We're living under tyranny. Time we face up to that. Now, Marine Le Pen is returning to the Front National to take the helm. The party is gearing up to try and take on Emmanuel Macron in the upcoming French parliamentary elections. Try and put in a parliament that will be more in line with Marine Le Pen's and the Front National's agenda. I don't know why they're not making a stink about the election fraud. It may be that the laws are as restrictive on that issue in France as they are in the United States of America. The laws are literally written to make it very, very difficult to pursue claims of election fraud. For example, here in Hawaii, we hardly have an election go by without somebody screaming there was election fraud. But there's literally a 2-week statute of limitations on election fraud, which means you have just 2 weeks after the election to put together enough evidence to bring a case. And 2 weeks is nowhere near enough time. They're trying to preserve the illusion that our elections are honest. I think last year kind of pretty much destroyed that. And of course, it's Russia's fault. They're trying to undermine the public trust in our democracy. No, actually, Hillary Clinton and the DNC did that. Apparently, up in Sweden, a pensioner is being prosecuted for hate after he went on Facebook accusing migrants of torching cars, which is a big problem in Sweden. But Sweden is like the world capital for political correctness. They've got a feminist government. They brag about it's a feminist government. When Jeremy Clarkson and James May and Richard Hammond on Grand Tour were in Sweden, they were just making fun of just how over-the-top PC the whole country had gone, which is probably why they won't be going back there anytime soon. But it's like Sweden has this out-of-control rape problem, and their attitude is, don't talk about it, don't talk about it. You know, we love our open borders, we love our refugees, don't talk about it. It's not politically correct to talk about it. We've had another unfortunate incident with police killing an absolutely innocent person. This is over in Tulsa. And apparently police officer Betty Shelby fatally shot 40-year-old Terrence Crutcher. This happened last September, and now she's coming up on being charged. Now, Terrence had car trouble. He was going home from night classes at the community college, and he had car trouble. She pulled up to see what was going on, and he was basically standing well away from her. He had his hands up. Witnesses said absolutely no threat. There was no weapon in the car, no weapon on his person, hands up, well away from her. And this police officer with a straight face went on in and said that there was something about him that made her fear for her life. And by the way, this is not the first time she's been involved in an inappropriate shooting. So they may be looking, apparently they're charging her with first-degree manslaughter, and they ought to. We have become far too tolerant of the police, in fact, indeed, the entire government, choosing to act outside the law. And if Nancy Pelosi wants to honor the intent of the Founding Fathers, what they intended was a nation where everybody is subject to the same rule of law, from the guy taking out the trash right on up to the president themselves. Nobody is exempt, not even Hillary Clinton. Now, speaking of the PC, this is really getting out there. Over at the University of Michigan, they have a lot of buildings, including the Michigan Union, that are paneled in glossy brown mahogany wood. And you find mahogany paneling all over the country. It's there. It's a nice wood. It's durable. It lasts a long time. So apparently Anna Wibbleman, who used to head an organization concerned about enhancing college life called Building a Better Michigan, basically announced that minority students feel marginalized by this obviously masculine paneling that covers the walls of this century-old building. I mean, that's the latest microaggression. The wood paneling. The wood paneling makes us upset. It's just wood. I mean, the screeching has reached hysterical levels. And unfortunately, we are seeing evolve a liberal left culture that is starting to feel that they can get whatever they want, no matter how ridiculous, if they just scream and riot enough. And we dare not let that get out of control either. Because that really is getting into rule by the mob. I'm very concerned that as we continue to see this divide in Washington, D.C. escalate, even though the election is over, and the violence we are seeing from these liberal activists who are out there screaming that everybody but them is a Nazi or a fascist, we could see a civil war in this country, and I do not want to see that happen. I want to do everything possible that we do not have civil war and revolution in the streets of this country, because always the wrong people die in those things. So, I don't know how to tone it on down. There are unfortunately too many of our political leaders who see their own best fortunes lying in the fanning up of chaos. Maybe this is the beginning of the deliberate takedown of the United States to pave the way for the New World Order. We've seen it in so many other countries. All these color revolutions. Send people in, fan up the chaos, get rioting going, bring down the government, put in a puppet ruler. Maybe they're getting ready to try and establish a dictatorship in this country. We already actually have one, but it still has pretensions of being a republic with democratic elections. Maybe they don't want to go through the trouble of having to fake that every 4 years, because they keep getting caught at it. Okay, let's get on back to computers, because the WannaCry malware has exposed just how fragile and vulnerable the global IT infrastructure is. Now, when I was a kid and computers were first entering the home, the Apple II, the Commodore VIC-20, they were fun. They were toys. And it was cool. We could get on the internet and FTP and UUCP and all these other cool little functions for sharing information. But today, we are all dependent on that global internet for communication, for phone calls, for the content delivered to our TVs. It's become a critical piece of the global infrastructure. Whole economies depend on it. And we just got a wake-up call that because of intelligence agencies deliberately boring holes through it, that it's wide open. It could be brought down. These NSA tools could be used to craft a worm that could just go on out and cause huge amounts of damage. People are always talking about cyber warfare, and we mistakenly think that it's our military's computers against the other guy's military computer. But no, it's shaping up to be an attack on the civilian IT infrastructure. And I have another question. Wasn't that supposed to be what the NSA was doing all this time? Was fortifying our internet so that it couldn't be attacked like this? And then it's attacked like that. The NSA didn't stop it. They can't find who did it. And even worse, the NSA's own tools were being used to carry this out. There is something seriously, seriously messed up about all of this. And we need to ask some questions. What's the real agenda here? We know that governments and corporations and a lot of other vested interests don't like the internet. They don't like the free exchange of information. They'd like to take the world back to how it was in the 1950s, where we're all dependent on TV and radio and newspaper. And the only way to communicate with each other is a paper letter delivered by the post office. Somebody actually thinking about trying to literally take us back from the age of the internet because of the threat it represents to entrenched power, to the oligarchs. But there should be a wake-up call. And so far, I'm not really seeing that anybody is saying that it's time for some fundamental changes to internet security to keep this stuff from happening. Mostly I'm seeing ads for buy our new anti-ransomware software. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. I'm going to step back to the war zones here. Just had this story posted by a member. This is coming out of Activist Post. Apparently, there are reports that Syrian government forces are moving toward Deir ez-Zor and basically moving toward this U.S.-UK base. And they're apparently within 15 miles of the base. And this could be a very, very tense situation because the Syrian government has not given either the United States or Great Britain permission to be on Syrian soil. And so whether they're just going to surround them and make stink face at them, I hope that's all they're going to do. But if they actually start fighting, the war's going to be on for real. And the U.S. will say, how dare you shoot at us for illegally being in your country? And they'll be off and running. We all know some very unhappy things are about to happen. It's just a question of when. Getting on back to computers and security. And by the way, the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Go ahead and call on in. So security experts are saying that this WannaCry ransomware may just be getting started. And behind that is another observation. Those NSA hacking tools are all over the dark web. And I'm sure there are other people who are figuring out interesting things to do with them. We've all seen movies about, how hackers destroy nuclear power plants and all the rest of that stuff. And supposedly the control systems for facilities like that are air-gapped. But on the other hand, you can get that stuff in there with a flash drive. That's how they got Stuxnet into the Iranian nuclear processing plant. Came in on a flash drive. This is just beginning. And somebody really needs to be saying, okay, it's time to implement some new protocols on the Internet to end anonymity, to be basically guarantee that whoever is accessing your server, that you know who they are. Or if they're using multiple hops, that you can immediately backtrace to the source. It's not that difficult to implement. And every time somebody has suggested it, we always get, it'll just be too much of a bandwidth load. We could never support it. It's just going to cost us too much money and cause too much problems. Well, I think at this point, that is now moot. Look at how many problems and how much money it's going to cost now that these NSA tools are out there for any little kiddie living in his parents' basement to go on out and say, I think I'm going to go out and start blowing up line transformers, because those are on the net. I'm not the only one saying that. Another story from Investment Watch Blog. You'd think we'd be a little more worried. By now, everyone with an Internet connection is aware of the ransomware attack that shut down hundreds of thousands of computers over the weekend. Now, there's already a new version of the WannaCry out there. It does have a kill switch, but it doesn't really kill it. It just slows it down. I'm not entirely sure what the rationale for that is. Obviously, a total kill switch was their undoing for the first version, because there was that 22-year-old blogger in London who figured out just by registering the domain he could stop the spread of WannaCry. And that raises another question. This one kid on his own could figure out how to stop this thing, and the NSA couldn't figure it out, CIA couldn't figure it out, the FBI couldn't figure it out. There's something very weird about how this is all coming down. All right, we're going to start taking some phone calls. Alex in Florida, I'm going to have to take you through the commercial break. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, I was just calling to see if there's any weight behind the fact that they're saying that Trump gave classified information to Russia. I'm so tired of hearing about all this impeachment crap. The main news is that basically Seth Rich, now they know that he gave the emails to WikiLeaks, but that's not what's being discussed. It's always BS.
Yeah, it's always on Trump. All right, well, listen, we got to take a break for commercials. When we come on back, I will respond to that. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Here we're going to go back to Alex in Florida, and we did touch on this at the top of the show, where basically yesterday the Washington Compost came out with a story saying that President Donald Trump had revealed highly classified information to Russian officials, and they were screaming, he can't do that, he can't do that. Actually, yes, he can. As President of the United States of America, Donald Trump has the authority to declassify any information he wants at any time he wants. In this case, though, there wasn't any classified information. All Trump shared with the Russian officials was the concern that terrorists may be looking at ways to turn laptops into bombs, and that was why they were considering a ban on having laptops in the cabin of passenger aircraft. But they're trying to make a big deal about it. McMaster's had a press conference earlier today and said no methods or sources were revealed. They just expressed the thing about the laptop. And all of this was all over the corporate media last week. This isn't a secret. It was all over the corporate media last week, but they're trying to make a big deal about it. They're still trying to find a way to get Donald Trump out of office. They're still trying to keep the focus off the fact that Hillary Clinton may have been selling U.S. secrets to other countries in exchange for donations to her foundation. And again, President Bill Clinton back in 1994 used his authority as president to declassify and then authorize the transfer of sensitive technology to China while Chinese money was being funneled into his re-election campaign war chest. The scandal was called Chinagate, and it should have been investigated, but as is usual with the Clintons, the investigation went nowhere. So that's what's going on with all this. It's a smear job. It's another attempt to smear Donald Trump. And again, yesterday the big news was there was a rumor, still unconfirmed by the way, that there's a sealed indictment involving Trump and Russia, and it has to stay sealed until after he's out of office because of sovereign immunity. And it's another propaganda tool. Oh, well, there's a sealed indictment. Obviously, he must be guilty. He must be guilty of something. Anyway, we're going to go back to the phones here. Rich in Nevada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Okay, and I guess Rick dropped, or we're having a problem with our phones. Okay, let's go to Jerry in Michigan. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Can you hear me okay?
I hear you just fine.
I have two things. One's incidental and one's quite important. I was awake one New Year's Eve when Bill Clinton came on the television, and everybody else was watching fireworks, I guess. And I sat here in amazed awe. I seen him transferring all of this technical steerage and able to launch rocketry and missiles and everything into China. He was just going on and on and on about it. He must have been doing it just before his final days in office. I mean, his final days in office or something. But anyway, that's the incidental part. It amazed me to sit here and watch television and see him doing that at that hour of the night. The other thing is, have you been aware of the Parker court case in the 5th Federal District Court?
Yeah,
we
had somebody call into the show yesterday, and there's an article making its way around the Internet that claims the Fifth Circuit Court has admitted to the tax code being fraudulently applied. But I actually went and read the Fifth Court's ruling, and it doesn't actually say that. So, I mean, I know we would all love to find a magic way to get the IRS off our backs. But I think there's a lesson to be learned from Sullivan versus United States. A lot of people have talked about it because, to give you the context of the lawsuit, Sullivan sued the United States government claiming that it was illegal for there to be a war in Iraq on the say-so of the president because there was no formal declaration of war as required by the Constitution. And the judge in the case, James C. Fox, basically said, well, there are a lot of things that are done that are not necessarily the letter of the law, but we just do it because we've been doing it all along. And the example he cited was the 16th Amendment. And he actually admitted in the court record that the 16th Amendment failed ratification. Then he went on to say that judges know this, but they are going to always rule in tax cases as if the 16th Amendment was ratified. And that sends you a signal that the courts and the government don't believe in following the rules. And it is an absolutist approach. The law is what we say it is, when we say it is, depending upon the situation. And so the reality is, again, the only way we're going to get out of this mess is we're just going to have to sit calmly and patiently and let this system tear itself apart the way the Soviet Union did. I do not advocate violent revolution. I'm opposed to violent revolution and civil war. I'm really opposed to getting into a new world war as a distraction from the economic problems because I think the United States is going to lose this one.
See, there was a case, this same case that a fellow did make application, so it shows on the internet on losthorizons.com, and he made application for the back his last year's payment, and evidently they have a check there showing that he received that payment back to him. So if a person wanted to look at it, it's all on that same internet page as far as I could determine.
All right.
Anyway, that's all I had. Thank you.
All right. If you'll mail me that URL, I will take another look at it. But there's a lot of bad information out there about how to deal with taxes. And you need to be very, very careful about what's going on. But in the end, the government is so desperate for money, like James C. Fox said in Sullivan versus United States, they're not actually following the letter of the law. They're being expedient to get what they want. And that's a very sobering realization of the government that we live under. Anyway, thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go and switch to Rick in Nevada. Aloha, Rick. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, what's your take on chemtrails, real or hoax?
They're contrails from normal aircraft, and the reason that they form grids in the sky is from commuter flights that fly back and forth on a regular schedule while the air is moving to one side, and that's really all it is. It's another piece of nonsense that's put out on the internet to try and make us look like we're a bunch of kooks, so the corporate media can say, see, they're nuts over there on the independent media, and you should come on back, and we will give you the real news instead of the fake news. So thank you very much for that phone call, and we're going to move on here. Still talking about computers and computer information. There's always been an issue with online signatures for contracts. We still live in a society where a contract is not binding unless it has been signed by both parties. But when you're working on different parts of the globe and you're doing your negotiations over the internet, how do you actually accomplish that? And there are companies that basically go through a process of validating you are who you are, and we will electronically, digitally sign documents. And one of the biggest outfits is called DocuSign. And apparently one of its email systems was cracked by fisher folk, spelled with a PH. And basically it's resulted in a phishing campaign that sees messages with the subject line, completed, some company name, accounting invoice number, document ready for signature, land in inboxes. And it links to, it has a Microsoft Word document with macro-enabled malware. Now, obviously, this kind of phishing attack is not going to be directed at individuals. It is, though, going to be directed at businesses who are getting hundreds and hundreds of invoices a week, and they just go on through and they sign and they process, and they're not paying attention. So you need to be very, very careful. Now, remember what I said a little while ago about how these NSA tools are going to be used for other things besides WannaCry. And apparently there is already another malware that's out there. In fact, it may have been out there longer than WannaCry, but it's one of these that remains hidden. You don't know your computer's been impacted by it. And it apparently is a cryptocurrency miner. And what it does, this worm, basically works into machines all around the world, and it uses spare cycles on the machine to do what is called cryptocurrency mining for the Monero cryptocurrency, which is an alternative to Bitcoin. So that's another way that these tools are being used. So if your machine is running a little slowly, you might want to be taking a look to see if you have this particular malware. But it's almost like it's open season on law-abiding citizens and their computers. It really is. And let's see. Somebody just wrote in asking if my site is being hammered, and I said yes. And looking at the logs, they're DOSing the Clinton body count article. They don't want anybody reading that one with all this news about Seth Rich out there. Okay, let's see. We're going to take a phone call from Jimmy in Texas. Aloha, what's on your mind? Talking.
Hello.
More coffee.
Hello, Mike. Can you hear me good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I just, thank you for taking my call. I was just reading your website. That thought of the day, I like it. It brings me to what I was going to talk about healthcare and about, don't know if you saw that town hall meeting in North Dakota where that man got up and put the money inside that congressman's pocket and said, you know, you're giving tax breaks to all these millionaires and billionaires, and you know, they're going to cut her taxes. But that's funny because like this all comes together. You know, remember back in the 90s when they were telling us how they couldn't, like, remember how they were trying to get people off welfare and get people off these government assistance? And even back then I was thinking, why are they telling our people not to have kids, not to, you know, grow the society, you know? And then now look today, you have a big migrant crisis in Europe and here, and they're just giving you the money anyways. It's not like they were going to save it, but they were telling us that we have to do it less while they use corporations divvy the money out the way they want to, whether it be subsidized to housing, insurance, food, or military. And that also goes to, I mean, really all this goes down to keeping our economy well and alive to basically keep Israel going, because Israel strategically is not a good military holding for us. Strategically, well, it's horrible.
No, actually, in terms of domination of the Middle East, Israel's in a very, very good position. You know, it's certainly its coastline along the Mediterranean. It's centrally placed, and it has been used to threaten the other nations in the Middle East, which helped drag them into the petrodollar deal following Nixon's ending of gold convertibility. The problem is that the petrodollar deal was that if the oil-producing Middle Eastern nations would sell their oil only for the dollar and invest that money in the United States, the U.S. would protect them from the aggressions of Israel. But more recently, it's become very obvious that the U.S. can't control Israel, and so that's why so many of these oil-producing nations are now looking at selling their oil for other currencies from other countries. Because if you accept U.S. dollars for your oil and you come to the United States with U.S. dollars, there isn't that much to buy. We don't manufacture the way we used to. Nobody wants our GMO agriculture. If you accept the Chinese yuan and you go to China, they're a manufacturing powerhouse. Same thing if you accept the ruble. They've got GMO-free agriculture. And so this whole petrodollar deal is kind of falling apart.
But that's the reason why the United States is so corrupt and why we're doing things that don't look to interest us. Because you could say that, you know, controlling these Middle Eastern countries and their resources kind of helps us, but not really, because we take more money to do that. And that's what I'm saying. Like, if our economy were to falter, where would Israel get its backing, its money? And some people,
from other countries.
Say the Russians.
From other countries. Do you think?
Well,
do you think the United States is the only country that Israel is parasiting off of?
No, of course not. But Israel doesn't trust like it's the only one that has goods on. I mean, Israel has the goods on everybody in all the leaders in the U.S. because of the NSA and the biggest tech company. You know, Israel, that tech company there got backdoors through everything. And the funny thing is, it's run by mostly Russian Jews. I mean, I mean, from what the evidence or what it's saying is that Israel's stealing from us and then selling it, just like they did. You said with the South African nukes, they're stealing from us and they're selling to our adversaries.
Yeah, that has been a problem. That has been a problem. The U.S. will transfer weapons to Israel. Israel will reverse engineer them and then make a new version that they will then sell often to countries that are hostile to us. Anyway, Tom, we need to let you go. Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to switch to Tom in Philadelphia. Tom, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I think this is the same guy that was talking about the IRS stuff I heard on John's show last night. This might take a minute, but I want to just let everybody know that's listening that what I'm about to say is not hearsay. It's not something I read. This is personal experience with the IRS. I'm not trying to stifle anybody from challenging anything, but there's some stuff that people got to know if they think they're going to try to take them on. First thing you have to be prepared for is to lose your wife, your home, your bank, your car, and most of all, your freedom. When these people are challenging the IRS, if they get taken into court, and a lot of these guys are out writing books, they're doing lectures, they're writing pamphlets, oh, I beat the IRS, I beat the IRS. They didn't beat the IRS. When you go to court because you didn't file a tax return, you're not in there challenging the law. You're going in front of a jury to say, I made a mistake and I didn't willfully not file a return. All you're trying to do is convince them that you made a mistake. The law stands. There's a lot of charlatans running around, and I've been involved in this since 1979 back with Irwin Schiff, and we all know where Irwin Schiff ended up, dying in prison. And, you know, he's a great patriot, and he fought for what he believed, but he didn't do it correctly. I've had friends who went to jail. If you're going to do something like this, do not listen to one person or one source. Do your own research. If you're going to do this, make sure you write many, many letters to the IRS before you even think of stopping filing or paying.
Okay.
You could lose your job. You know, there's a lot of stuff there, buddy.
Okay, we're out of time.
Jumping into something.
Sorry, Tom, we're out of time. We got to let you go. We'll be right back with another phone call. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And apparently over in Chippewa County, they're under a tornado watch, so you might want to be paying attention to that. The weather is really kind of interesting. We actually had a cold snap hit us here. More about that a little bit later in the show. We're going to go back to the phones here. Layla in Ottawa, Ontario. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Great to be on your show.
Yes, I was expecting your phone call. We may have to take you through the station identification, but go ahead and just tell everybody your story here. This relates to the so-called open borders policy for illegal immigrants and refugees, but it's not really all that open. So tell us your story.
Well, I'm Canadian, and my husband is American, and we, met and fell in love, and we went back to British Columbia, Canada, got married there, and excuse me, we had crossed the border at Peace Arch because, in Canada and the U.S. we're allowed to be in either country for 6 months. So we crossed into the U.S., came back into Canada. It was at the Canadian border we were somewhat harassed in regards to, this coming and going. And it was only our first time doing this. And the Border Patrol said, well, we're not going to tolerate this, back and forth every 6 months. You have to get his immigration papers going. So, and we knew that from the get-go. So we started.
Was this the U.S. Border Patrol or the Canadian Border Patrol?
The Canadian Border Patrol.
Okay.
On the U.S. side, well, I've been in and out of the U.S. since the age of 19. I've gone shopping in the U.S., never been questioned or anything. Well, I got fingerprinted and my picture got taken on the U.S. side, and I'm just standing there, I'm thinking, what is going on? I didn't do anything wrong. But the whole thing is, you know, we got the application going, and we trusted a friend's cousin who was a retired lawyer. He referred us to a friend of his who he referred to as a immigration lawyer. And, you know, my husband did all the tests that are required from Immigration Canada, you know, medical tests, RCMP, fingerprinting. We did everything, and we paid for it as well. And we waited. We were promised a work permit by June 2014, which never showed up because the immigration consultant had written on the piece of paper, work permit, $150. So we went to the bank, paid for it. The bank takes a copy. We give a copy of it to we find out now he's a consultant, which he has to send into Immigration Canada. I find out it never went towards a work permit. The whole issue is that we had...
Okay, Layla, we're going to have to take a pause for station identification. When we come on back, if you could sort of sum up what the situation is and
sure.
what the current status is. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, and we're talking with Layla in Ottawa, Ontario. And apparently the idea of open borders isn't a universal one because Layla is Canadian, her husband is American, and they're just having a heck of a time being allowed to live someplace. So if you could kind of like sort of sum up where you are now, where you're going, and what the problem continues to be.
Well, to sum it up, what ended up happening, Canadian Border Patrol showed up at our door, handcuffed my husband, frisked him, and put him in jail. Next day, I go to, try to get this all sorted out with no avail because nobody was available to talk to me until last minute. They told me he's being sent back, and I was beside myself. The whole thing is, my concern is, here's our Prime Minister shouting out to the world, our borders are open. And refugees are just flocking into Canada. Meanwhile, we have paid for the process to ensure that everything goes well with his immigration application. My other concern, I've done a lot of investigating on my end here in Canada. I've found out what happened, what's gone wrong. Now I'm looking at what's happened on the U.S. side. We have requested documents from the Northampton County Courthouse in Easton, Pennsylvania for 4 years. And for 4 years, those documents did not show up until after the fact. My husband's back in the U.S. So how are, regular Canadian and American citizens being treated? Or, why are we being treated this way when we have paid our dues to ensure that we've done everything possible to make sure that, my husband's in Canada, not illegally? Why is this happening? Why is the government allowing this? I've reached out to the Prime Minister. I've emailed their office. They've referred the case to the Immigration Minister. I've filed a formal complaint about now this I find out he's a consultant. He's not a lawyer. So he's under investigation. So where does it stop? Why is it that we are allowing, and, I understand people are living different lives in various other parts of the world, and they need to come to a safe zone. But what about our very own citizens?
It does seem like there's a very obvious double standard there for Canada to say we have open borders and then have this problem with an American citizen coming on in just to be with his wife. And
exactly.
Your portrayal of the Canadian border crossing, and of course it's been a long, long time since I went to Canada, but many years ago when I was still in computer animation, I had occasion to go to Toronto a couple of times. And the experience was always the same. Going into Canada, it was, hi, how are you, have fun, blah, blah, blah. And then coming back into the United States of America, the U.S. Border Patrol was just horribly abusive. And now all of a sudden you're telling me that seems to be the case with the Canadian Border Patrol as well. But you're right. It's a double standard and it's hypocrisy. If you say you're having open borders for illegal immigrants and refugees and so forth, why is it such a complex issue for somebody from the United States to go to Canada? And maybe Canada has just decided that they're concerned about a flood of Americans coming north. We know the Canadians are already upset about many of the illegal immigrants and refugees who've crossed into the United States who are now trying to get into Canada. But obviously, if your husband is a U.S. citizen, that should not be a factor. But it just sounds like a bureaucracy where the left hand does not know what the right hand is doing.
Oh, my goodness, Michael, you have no idea what I'm dealing with. I'm on the phone constantly. I am talking with Canadian Border Patrols. What can I do next? And each time I turn around, I'm being asked for more money. I don't understand. We've paid for all this, and it just broke my heart to watch my husband get handcuffed. He didn't deserve that. We didn't deserve this at all. I mean, we took every initiative to ensure that everything that Immigration Canada has requested, okay, he needs to do this next. So we did it. We paid for it. And in the end, he's being handcuffed, frisked,
well, remember that story
and
about
put into a Canadian jail.
Remember there was that story about a gentleman was here in the United States on a visa, was trying to get into Canada, couldn't get in, and he overstayed his visa by something like an hour, and they arrested him. So it really just seems to be another example of heavy-handed government bureaucracy.
But what is the reason behind it? And I believe there's more stories, more people out there that have experienced the same thing that, my husband and I have experienced. Because the Border Patrol at the office on Friday, January 6th at 4 p.m. tells me we're not the only two that they've had problems with from this consultant. And I just thought, well, where does this stop?
Maybe,
I mean, you're dealing with people's lives here. You're dealing with people that want to be together. That we come from two. I don't look at it as America.
Layla, let me get a couple of thoughts in here, and then we're going to let you go because I got to get back to news here. There are a couple of things. First of all, I think you need to actually get a real Canadian immigration lawyer on your side and maybe look to see if there are some organizations that provide assistance in sorting these things out. Trying to do it all on your own, I think is going to be a mistake. The other aspect is all of this talk about open borders is, of course, very threatening to the existing border enforcement departments, organizations, and staff, and they may just be getting more abusive and aggressive in an attempt to justify their the continuance of their budgets and say, well, open borders is all well and good, but look, we caught this American trying to sneak into our country and we handcuffed him and kicked him on out. So you may be dealing with that.
No,
but my advice is...
You know what I got? Sorry to interrupt you. I got, when I was dealing with Immigration Canada over the phone and trying to sort this all out, they said, you don't need a lawyer. You can do this all on your own. Because if you hire a lawyer, they'll do the same thing that the consultant did. And I was, really?
Well, I don't know. Well, if you're not going to get a lawyer, see if there are some immigration organizations. I mean, we certainly have a lot of them here in the United States helping the illegals and refugees into this country. I'm sure there has to be something like that up in Canada that is going to help you resolve this issue of getting your husband back into Canada to live with you. And I wish you a lot of luck. But
thank you so much, Michael. I'll tell you one thing. Through this whole ordeal, not one person has told me that I could appeal this whole thing. So I've, taken the steps to appeal, even to go as far as federal court if I need to.
Okay, but
this is wrong.
Well,
it's wrong, and it's wrong that Canadians
you're going,
and American-born citizens.
Kayla, I understand I understand it's wrong. If you're going to go to federal court, you need to get a lawyer. You need to get an immigration lawyer who is, allowed to appear before the bar. And
right.
I disagree with this idea that you can do it all yourself because obviously you have not had a tremendous amount of luck. Anyway, Layla, got to let you go.
Thank you, Michael.
Good luck. I wish you good luck. Boy, there's no greater curse on humanity than bureaucracy. Okay, we're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And there's a story that is out now, and again, it's part of this effort to demonize North Korea, and they're making a big deal over the fact that a United Nations agency in Geneva has been helping North Korea prepare an international patent application for production of sodium cyanide. Then they go on to say this is a chemical used to make the nerve gas tabun, and saying that sodium cyanide is been on a list of materials banned from shipment to North Korea by the UN Security Council since 2006. Well, if North Korea was doing something underhanded, they wouldn't apply for an international patent. They're looking to protect a process that has commercial value. And allegations about the nerve gas aside, sodium cyanide has a lot of industrial uses. It's used mainly to extract gold and other precious metals in mining. It's very toxic. It has a high affinity for gold. It's used to extract gold from ore. And it's also used for making cyanic chloride, cyanogen chloride, and many nitriles. And it's classified as a strong nucleophile. It's used to prepare chemicals that are used in a lot of pharmaceuticals. And so, frankly, the fact that they're applying for an international patent suggests they've come up with a new, novel way to make this stuff, and they want to license it. It's a commercial venture. It's not making poison gas. If they were making poison gas, they wouldn't tell anybody. They wouldn't apply for a patent. This is a business they're doing. All right, we're going to take another phone call. Ken in Fort Worth, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, there's going to be a 2000 automobile auction at the Indianapolis 500 racetrack this weekend. It's going to be on TV 3 days.
Wow.
Big.
Okay.
Yeah, see, snoop around until you find it.
Okay, you going to buy something?
I know, you got to come over and get a couple of them. And there's going to be about 4 or 5 number 1 Corvettes, too.
So that's a little above my budget, a little above my taste. You know, I mean, when I was young, I loved the fast zippy cars, but I'm an old guy now, and I just sort of poke along here, and you know.
I go to the public library in Fort Worth, and I get on the internet, and you got to have 3 clicks to get off the computer. You know, when you're done with your time, but it's 2 weeks. It's shut off on me 3 times by itself.
Well, there are problems with the net.
What happened before like that?
Well, there are problems with the net as a whole. I was checking earlier today. Spectrum, their performance is even worse than it has been before. The complaints are piling up. AT&T's got issues. So, again, between all of these outages and cutoffs, and I can't reach this and I can't reach that, plus the WannaCry ransomware, it is very obvious that our IT infrastructure is in a extraordinarily dangerously fragile condition, and it needs attention. It does need attention because we are all dependent on it now. We're dependent on the internet for our economic activity, our business activity, our communication, content delivery. If the internet gets seriously taken down, that's going to be a problem. Businesses are going to go out of business. Bills are not going to get paid.
Your information about conspiracies, right?
Well,
where else are you going to find it?
Well, I'm sure the government would like that part of it to go away, but obviously too much of our economy is dependent on the internet, and that could be a real problem.
When you get on your kind of computer, put in conspiracy, kind of wake them up.
Well, I try not to use the word conspiracy because conspiracy theorist was a phrase that was actually created by the CIA in the wake of the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and it was used as a label to simply dismiss anybody who questioned the official story without having to address the issues that they were raising.
multiple
shooters on the grassy knoll. Oh, you're just a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah, I know, but it doesn't scare me. I'm guilty.
Okay.
Conspiring against us, period.
Okay, well, Ken, thank you very much.
I'm done.
All right, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to switch to George in Texas. Aloha, George. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? The thing is, I'm sort of like starting to see it in some of the libertarian groups around here, and I'm even starting to see it on Facebook. Is like the argument because a few couples had a newborn baby, and one of the spouses is objecting to circumcision when it's a male child, and some it's a biblical thing. Some say it's a health issue, but they're starting to say, well, it's barbaric. It's against the male child's wishes and all that stuff. And and the thing is, they're saying all the complications that babies die from circumcision complication. I'm like, I said more people die from more babies die from prescription drugs and vaccines and complications of circumcision.
Well, it is a complex issue, and unfortunately, it is primarily rooted in religion. The idea that it is somehow advantageous to the child's health, that idea has pretty much gone away at this point. So it is primarily the religious argument. If I'd ever been lucky enough to be a father and had a son, I certainly would not have done that to him. So, but that's where I am. Anyway, not exactly the kind of topic we talk about on this show. So, George, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. And the phone lines are still open, 800-313-9443. Now, over in New Jersey, Governor Chris Christie is very much opposed to the decriminalization or legalization of marijuana. He's very much on board with Jeff Sessions on that one. However, his term in office is coming to an end at the end of the year, and already New Jersey lawmakers are crafting a recreational marijuana bill. And it's going to be ready to go in the new year. And under the bill, adults 21 and over would be allowed to possess up to 1 ounce of marijuana or 16 ounces of cannabis-infused products, including edibles. And, of course, it will be taxed, beginning at 7% and rising to 25% over the course of 5 years. And they're saying, no, it will not pass this year. Chris Christie will not sign it. But they're expecting more support after Christie leaves office next January. So I think New Jersey just told Jeff Sessions to go jump in a lake on that issue. Now let's talk about human-caused global warming. I just got an update. Over in Washington State, they're under a winter storm warning. This is May 16th. And snowflakes, large snowflakes are coming down over Snoqualmie Pass, which is a place that Claire and I loved to hang out in when we were living in the Cascade Mountains. And apparently Mount Washington has broken their snow record with nearly 3 feet of snow. And so that's coming on in. Human-caused global warming. It was a hoax. It was yet another in a long series of lies to trick you out of your money, out of your obedience. Time to stop going with the liars. Time to stop believing as you are told to believe, because that is what imprisons you. That's what enslaves you. No chain of iron or steel ever held a human being tighter than the chains of the beliefs that we are indoctrinated with when we are young. And you need to break free. Story out of Natural News, and this is a good statistic to keep in mind. As you know, the gun grabbers are out there. Oh, all these people who are being killed by guns. The children, think of the children. And apparently in 2012, according to the National Database of Inpatient Stays for Children, there were more than 5,000 children under the age of 17 treated for firearms injuries in 2012. Now, most of these were inadvertent accidents. Gun owners weren't locking up their guns, or the children had not been trained in gun safety. According to VAERS data, last year there were 45,742 reported adverse events requiring hospitalization following a vaccination. So more children are being harmed by vaccines than by gunshots. But guns are bad and vaccines are good because vaccines make money. And making money is good in the United States of America. And things that don't make money, well, they're really, really bad. And you have the editorial at the Boston Globe saying anybody opposed to vaccines ought to be hanged. And that's triggered a bit of a problem as well. There's going to be a protest over that. And it almost makes it look like the vaccine industry has turned into a terrorist outfit. You will buy and use our medication or we will do bad. We'll hang you from the lamppost for daring to be a vaccine heretic. Seems to be the mentality out there. And again, it's a $30 billion a year business using much of that money to perpetuate itself, to make itself mandatory. Remember what I said about Thomas Jefferson? If the government tells you what medicines you must take, you are living under tyranny. We'll be right back with a phone call after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And boy, the people who are pounding on my server, they are really trying to keep anybody from reading that article on the Clinton body count. So they must really, really be scared about that. All right, we're going to take a phone call. James in Tokyo. Oha gozaimasu. O genki desu ka? What's on your mind today?
Genki desu, Mike. Hope you're well.
Yes.
So I had a lot of experience going through the Canadian and American borders. I used to go to McGill University in Montreal, and I grew up in New York, so I would drive to that border like so many times. And when I went to the Canadian border the first time in a big station wagon with a lot of boxes, they put me in a room, and a guy says, "My name's Claude. You have any weapons?" I said, "Yeah, I have some nunchucks." He's like, "You're an ass kicker or you're a martial artist?" I said, "I like training martial arts." And what style? And I told him the style, and he goes, "Oh yeah, I train martial arts too. So I'm not going to go through. You don't have to take it out or give it to me, and you're okay. And next time you come through, ask for me. I like to see how you like your experience in university and if you learn any French." And then when I go back into America, they would take the back seat out of this 1970 Dodge Dart that I had and, look under all the seats and stuff. And it was a totally different experience.
It really was, and again, that was my experience when I was going into Canada. Of course, I wasn't going there for any long period of time. It was just, a week or so. Going into Canada, very polite, very, very, very nice. Coming back into the United States, my own country, and I was being treated on the assumption I was some kind of a criminal. But apparently the situation is now going either way, is a major problem, and I'm really sorry that this lady seems to be having such issues. When the Prime Minister is out there saying we've got open borders, all she wants is for her husband to be able to live with her, and you would think that somebody in that bureaucracy would look at that and say, this is not a threat to our country. Let's cut some red tape and just let these people have a happy life.
Yeah, unfortunately that doesn't happen in society nowadays. Hey, I heard you the other day saying it was your anniversary with that lovely playing Angel Claire.
Yes.
And congrats for that. And unfortunately, if me and you were put in a geo facility, I expect nothing to happen with us, but I wish you congratulations on that.
Well, thank you very much. And, Claire's the best thing in my life. And, well, that's all that really needs to be said about that. Okay, James, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go.
Can I talk about Bitcoin a sec?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. With the recent hacking job, a lot of the ransom, they asked for it to be paid in Bitcoin. And I think that this is some kind of government operation. I think that they're asking for all the ransom in Bitcoin. I think it's something against Bitcoin to prevent it from keep operating. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, there's absolutely no question that the Federal Reserve hates any alternative medium of exchange than the Federal Reserve note. They shut down the Liberty Dollar, and unless they can find some way to co-opt it to their own benefit, the Federal Reserve does not want there to be any other medium of exchange out there. And indeed, they're pushing for this cashless society. They literally want control of all the nation's wealth in their banks. And that's yet another form of tyranny that we are having to deal with right now.
I think it's something to follow and keep an eye on, because that's what I think it's all about. And that's all I have to say.
Okay, well,
good day, Michael.
All right, thanks an awful lot. And again, none of these things are done for just one purpose. This WannaCry ransomware, certainly it's going to stimulate sales of computer security software. They're blaming it on North Korea to try and push the war agenda. Yes, this is making Bitcoin look like a currency of criminals, which unfortunately is often the case here. But yeah, the Federal Reserve really wants us to be dependent on their Federal Reserve note. And there is no law that says we have to be. We can agree on any medium of exchange we care to use. And that's what the Federal Reserve fears. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show where the corporate media is really trying to pile on Donald Trump. The New York Slimes just came out with a report claiming Trump asked Comey to end the FBI probe into Michael Flynn. The White House is, of course, denying this, but the story's just been picked up and carried everywhere, unlike the story about Seth Rich, which is barely getting acknowledgement there at all. There are rumors that Sean Spicer is indeed going to be let go from the White House staff. You probably noticed over the last few days more and more of the press briefings have been handled by the Deputy Press Secretary, Sarah Huckabee Sanders. And apparently Fox News host Kimberly Guilfoyle is openly gunning for the job. She wants to be the new press secretary, so that's something happening there. Meanwhile, the search for a new director of the FBI is starting to hit some bumps, because some of the people under consideration have decided they don't want the job after all. Judge Merrick Garland and U.S. Senator John Cornyn of Texas are basically saying they want to bow on out because they're leaving their important, very secure jobs for one fraught with politics and controversy, and they don't want to really get into that mess at all. Meanwhile, getting on back to the computer hackers story, another story that's coming on out. Apparently over at the Disney Studios, hackers have broken on in and obtained the complete digital file for one of their upcoming summer blockbuster movies, and they're holding it for ransom. If Disney does not pay the ransom in Bitcoin, they will simply dump this digital file onto the Internet and basically destroy its profitability right there. Speculation is that it may be the new Pirates of the Caribbean movie or the new sequel to Cars. But again, something has got to be done about computer security, and it's got to be done now. Something has to be done about the hackers. We have to have a system that makes it harder for these people to operate in anonymity. And that's the hackers that are attacking Disney, the hackers that are attacking my server. The time for something like that is now. All right, we're going to go ahead and take a couple of phone calls. Kathy in Massachusetts, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Kathy, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, what's on your mind?
Yep. I just was thinking when the guy was talking about crossing over to the border in college, my mom and I drove from Texas all the way up into Canada. When we got to Vancouver, I don't remember her prepping me not to, divulge that we had my dad's pistol in the trunk. So we got to the border, and the Canadian Mountie, he's asking my mom all these questions, and do you have any firearms? And she said no. And I just naturally, because I'm a truth teller, I'm just an honest person, I said, oh, well, don't forget, Mom, we have dad's pistol in the trunk.
That was smart of you to do. That was smart of you to do.
No, I'm not dumb. I'm honest. Okay. No, I'm not dumb. I'm honest. And I didn't know, I don't lie. I'm not a liar. So, I did it very genuinely, very innocently. I was very young. I was probably 22 at the oldest.
Okay, well, what happened?
Honestly, we were treated with dignity and respect.
Okay, well, that's good.
By the Mountie.
And again, my
mom was not too happy, and we had to turn around and go to the other side of the border and lock it up, and they basically had They have stalls you can buy locks, ring a locker to put your firearms in before you drive across the border. No, I'm just honest. I've always been a truth teller. And it was just a very genuine, honest mistake. And she didn't prep me to lie, and I probably wouldn't have been comfortable with that anyhow. But the Canadian Mountie was just the look on his face. I'll never forget the postcard image of those two, the look on both of those faces at that very moment when I told the truth. It was quite telling. Anyway, I just thought of that, and I hope you have a lovely day.
All right, well, thank you very much. And again, when Claire and I were, thank you very much. We're going to let you go. When Claire and I were living in the Cascades in Washington State before we came here to Hawaii, we used to drive up into Vancouver every once in a while because the over-the-counter pharmaceuticals were cheaper, and it was just a very pretty city. And we were always treated politely going into Canada, and we were always given the third degree coming back in. All right, Sherry in Fredericksburg. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, this is also for Leela. Is that her name? Leela,
Layla, yes.
Layla, okay. Art Bell, the former Coast to Coast host, married a woman who was Asian. And now this happened a long time ago, but if I'm not mistaken, he would talk at length about the trouble they had with her going and visiting her family in the Philippines and all this stuff. She went over there, and if I'm not mistaken, he couldn't get her back. There's some kind of unspoken immigration law regarding this sort of scenario. Now he's living in the Philippines. I don't know if which means that could be one solution. Maybe she needs to move to Canada. But I think since he's a public figure,
She's in Canada, and you may be right. Her solution might be to move down to the United States to be with her husband. But then again, she's going to go through that same bureaucratic nightmare with America's Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. Actually, if I were Layla, I would learn to speak Syrian, get a spray over tan, and apply for refugee status.
Yeah, maybe so. Well, she could maybe get in touch with Art Bell, and because he's a big name, and he tried everything, so he might be able to advise her, and before she spends more money and just has to run in circles. He would be a resource. If he's still a public figure, but she could also probably find out how to get in touch with him through George Norrie and the current Coast to Coast host and program. But I just thought I'd throw that out there because I remember he was so frustrated, and they Xerox all this information, and then they send it, and they say, well, we didn't receive it. They'd have to Xerox it all again, and this went on and on and on. There really is something they're not telling us. But, I wanted to say something about cyber stuff. They're just going to have to stop spying on us, Mike, and opening the door to finding out every little thing about us, because people are just using that open door. Now, I know this is a loose interpretation because I don't know how any of it works, except there's little algorithms to make a hack, but they're just going to have to stop messing around with us themselves if they're going to do anything about keeping our nation secure. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes absolute sense. But the NSA's got its own agenda, and the CIA's got its own agenda, and they're out there saying we have to have the ability to spy on everybody. And the fact that it's causing these problems out here and this wave of cybercrime, well, that's unfortunately it's collateral damage. It's just the cost of doing business. I have yet to even hear anybody from the NSA come on out and apologize for the very sloppy way they were handling these very, very powerful cyber weapons. And even Microsoft has come on out and said these cyber weapons can cause damage on the scale of a weapons of mass destruction, and they should be kept under as strict controls as weapons of mass destruction. And they aren't. They were just lying around, and somebody broke into NSA or somebody leaked them, and they're all over the darknet. And yeah, we're going to see a lot of mischief being caused by these NSA spy tools and the CIA spy tools now that they're being let out.
We definitely will, and that's what I meant by why do they put boots on the ground when all you have to do is press a button? I don't know if our enemies are behind this or just someone who just wants to make some money for their organization or what, but it's not so surprising, but thanks for allowing me to sound off about it. All
right. Well, I think we have to look at this whole issue. Thank you very much for the phone call. do we have good government in this country? And the answer is no. We're being flooded with illegal immigrants and refugees, many of them criminal, many of them carrying contagious diseases. Does that sound like good government? Our infrastructure, our roads are crumbling, our bridges are substandard, we've dams on the verge of collapse, nuclear power plants operating way past the end of their expected lifespan. Is that good government? We have an economy on the verge of a horrendous meltdown. Does that sound like good government? In the name of national security and spying on all of us in violation of the Fourth Amendment, we've been left wide open to cybercrime. Does that sound like good government? It doesn't to me. It doesn't sound like good government at all. Now then, getting on back, we were talking about the vaccines and how vaccines are actually harming more children than guns are. And yet, guns are bad, vaccines are good. You cannot have a gun, but you will have your vaccines. You have no choice over it. And that gets back to what Thomas Jefferson said. When the government tells you what medicines you take, you are living under tyranny. Absolutely right. So, a little while ago, the Boston Globe came out with an editorial. I'm sorry, Boston Herald. I misspoke. The Boston Herald had an editorial basically saying that anybody opposed to vaccines, including ones with mercury in them, a known neurotoxin, ought to be hanged to death. And so a lot of people basically called up law enforcement and said this represents a threat of bodily harm in order to coerce a certain point of view, which technically is a violation of the USA Patriot Act. And there were calls for these for the Boston Herald editorial staff to be investigated for this. And Massachusetts Attorney General has come on out and saying no, there will be no investigation. They are perfectly okay to threaten people opposed to vaccines with death. Now, Thursday, there's going to be a rally in front of the Boston Herald over this idea that anybody opposed to vaccines should be hanged. Because that, when they resort to that kind of language, when they resort to those kind of threats, it's basically an admission they don't really have arguments on their side. They can't prove the vaccines are safe. In many cases, this stuff hasn't even been tested. There's never actually been a toxicity study of mercury preservatives being administered. And there's a lot of evidence suggesting that this explosive rise in autism is being driven by the explosive increase in the number of mandated vaccines. All right, we're going to take another phone call. Ivan in Ohio, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hey, Mike. Hey, I was just wanting to let you know in regards to a call yesterday about the Ron Gibson archive.
Yep.
There's also another huge archive of your videos at Conspiracy Scope. YouTube.
Okay. I guess I'm all over the place.
Yeah, I just wanted to pass that along. The guy's been doing it for a long time. Actually, Alex Jones even mentioned the guy by name on one of his videos one time I caught it. But outside of that, that was all I had to say. I just wanted to give a shout out to Keith and John. So, all right.
Hello?
Thanks.
Oh, okay. You cut out there for a second.
Oh, yeah, I said that's pretty much all I had to tell you, but I just wanted to give a shout out to Keith in Montana and John. So, all right?
All right. Well, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Now, this story actually did make the corporate media, and it's a cautionary tale. Apparently, there was... It's a very sad story. Apparently, there was a 16-year-old student, and he had a large diet soda, followed by an energy drink, and those are known to be dangerous, then followed by a latte. Actually, the energy drink was on top of the latte and the diet soda, loaded up with caffeine. And too much of anything is going to be bad. And apparently this 16-year-old student, Davis Allen Kripe, the coroner is saying, yeah, it was caffeine poisoning. So you got to be very, very careful about these products that are being sold and marketed. They may actually be hazardous if you take too much of them. All right, let's talk a little bit about space exploration. Apparently, NASA is going to have to pull back on some of the promises regarding Trump's moonshot. And they're going to miss their deadline for the first flight of the Orion capsule and the Space Launch System. This is NASA's follow-on to the Space Shuttle program. They're coming to a new Space Launch System. It's not a shuttle. And the Orion capsule is sort of an enlarged, roomier, can carry more people version of the Apollo capsule. And they were hoping they were going to get this thing to fly next year. Now it's been pushed back to 2019. And in addition to that flight, which is unmanned, it's going to be an unmanned test, the second mission that is scheduled to actually carry astronauts is probably going to miss its original 2021 date. So the U.S. is having a very hard time getting back into space. And a big reason for that, of course, is that we lost the technology that we developed for spaceflight. It's not sitting there in a building just waiting for the lights to be turned on. When a program gets canceled, whether it's the Saturn V or the Space Shuttle, the jigs are scrapped. The plans are filed away. But over time, available methods change. You can't get the same materials you got before. You have to research new materials. And probably building a new Saturn V or a new Space Shuttle with the most recent technology would be a better way to go. But again, the infrastructure within NASA to do this has been allowed to go away. A lot of those NASA scientists who programmed computers for the missions to the outer planets and the missions to the moon and everything, actually got hired by Wall Street to start writing those algorithms for the high-frequency trading. And they're being very well paid. They're not going to come on back. So it's going to be very, very slow for NASA to get back into space, and I'm rather sorry to see it. Because I remember the golden age of NASA, sending spacecraft all over the place. It was wonderful. Now then, talking about respective educational systems. CalMSat is the world's smallest satellite. It was built by an Indian teenager, Rifat Shahrukh. He's a 12th grade student from Tamil Nadu's Palapati town, and it will be launched into space by NASA next month. 12th grade student built a satellite, weighs just 1/10 of a kilogram, and it's going into space. That's got to be an incredible thrill. Actually, one cool thing the shuttle did do was called the Getaway Special. And what that was is every time a space shuttle mission was configured, there was always a little extra weight left over. And so the shuttle actually had this special canister called the Getaway Special, where you could apply to have your own payload put in there. And for educational institutions, it was usually free. And a lot of American school kids got their projects to fly into space on the Getaway Special. That's what made it exciting. That's what made it real. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And the media is just going wild over this latest story that President Trump asked Comey to end the FBI investigation into Michael Flynn, which qualifies as obstruction of justice, which qualifies as an impeachable offense. The White House is saying, no, it didn't happen. We don't know where they're getting this information. And former FBI Director Comey, he could be doing this as part of his revenge against Donald Trump. But it almost feels like there is now a full court press to get rid of Donald Trump any way they can, because he's an impediment to the New World Order and the oligarchs. So this feels like it's going to get really, really ugly. Meanwhile, Pope Francis has acknowledged that there is a 2,000 case backlog in sex abuse cases involving the Catholic clergy. And there may even be more than that. The Catholic Church's history has been to ignore the problem, make it go away, pretend it's not a problem. But it is, and it has been historically. And not exactly the image of an entity that supposedly is the earthly representation of supreme moral authority. I like this one. This is over in Africa. Apparently, there was a pastor who wanted to replicate the biblical story of Jesus Christ walking on water. This was over in Zimbabwe. And the pastor is Jonathan Methethwa of the Saint of Last Days Church. And he walked into the river and was promptly eaten by 3 crocodiles. And one of the members of the church was quoted as saying, "The pastor taught us about faith on Sunday last week." Boy, that's a little bit out there. I'm sorry. That's just a little bit out there. And here's the kicker. The river is known as Crocodile River. It's not like it was a big surprise there were crocodiles in there. All right, well, we're almost to the end of the show here, and we're just seeing that this obvious media campaign, smear Trump, smear Trump, smear Trump, and it does look like we're coming up on a coup d'etat to get him out of the White House any way possible. Emphasis on any way. And it really does look more and more like the months preceding the collapse of the former Soviet Union, where the political infighting was so great, the government was paralyzed and unable to function. They had lost the confidence and trust of the Soviet citizenry, especially after Chernobyl, and it just reached a point where it couldn't operate anymore and it fell apart. And that, I think, would be the best possible outcome for the situation we are all in, because it avoids civil war, which is bloody. It avoids revolution, which is bloody. It avoids World War III, which we're going to lose. This may be it. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get out of here and get some things done with the rest of the day. I'll be back here tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. I need you all to do me a favor. Contact the conservative talk radio stations in your area. Point them at republicbroadcasting.org. Ask them to please start carrying our program. And thank you very much for all that you're doing to help us grow the RBN network. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.